Young women painting watch dials in a factory, their brushes dipped in paint that glows like magic. They lick their brushes to get a finer point, not knowing they're swallowing poison. Some even paint their fingernails and teeth with the glowing substance for fun at parties. Within years, their jaws begin rotting away, their bones snap like twigs, and their bodies literally glow in the dark from the inside out. This isn't science fiction. This is the true story of the Radium Girls, and their tragedy would change workplace safety laws forever. The story begins in 1898, when Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium, a mysterious element that glowed without any external light source. By 1902, scientists had mixed radium with zinc sulfide to create a luminous paint called undark. This miraculous substance could make anything glow in the dark, and the military immediately saw its potential for watches, instrument panels, and airplane dials that soldiers could read in trenches and cockpits during World War I. The U.S. Radium Corporation opened its factory in Orange, New Jersey in 1917, followed by similar facilities across the country. The Radium Dial Company in Ottawa, Illinois, and other manufacturers recruited young women, typically between 17 and 25 years old, to paint the tiny numbers on watch faces. The work required incredible precision and steady hands, and women were considered naturally suited for such delicate tasks. These jobs were considered prestigious and well-paying for working-class women. The dial painters earned about 3 times more than factory workers and were told they were lucky to work with such a wonderful substance. The radium paint was marketed as completely safe, even beneficial to health. Some companies claimed radium had healing properties and could cure everything from arthritis to impotence. The painting process required extreme precision. To create the finest possible brush tip, supervisors instructed the women to point their brushes using their lips and tongues. This technique, called lip pointing, meant that with every stroke, the workers were ingesting tiny amounts of radium-laced paint. A single dial painter might lick her brush hundreds of times per day, slowly accumulating radioactive material in her body. What made the situation even more tragic was that many women brought the glowing paint home for entertainment. They painted their fingernails, teeth, and even their faces with undark to surprise friends and family. Some would paint their lips for a glowing smile at parties. Parents would let children play with leftover paint, not realizing they were handling one of the most dangerous substances known to man. The first signs of trouble appeared around 1922. Dial painters began complaining of fatigue, joint pain, and dental problems. Their teeth started falling out, and many developed painful sores in their mouths. Company doctors dismissed these symptoms as unrelated to their work, often suggesting the women had poor hygiene or sexually transmitted diseases. By 1924, the situation had become undeniable. Women were dying at alarming rates, and those still alive were suffering from horrific symptoms. Their jawbones were literally rotting away in a condition that came to be known as radium jaw. The radiation had settled in their bones, causing them to become brittle and break easily. Some women's entire jaws had to be removed, leaving them unable to eat or speak properly. Perhaps most disturbing of all, many of the women actually glowed in the dark. The radium in their bodies had made them living sources of light. Their hair, skin, and even their breath would emit a faint green glow in darkened rooms. Some workers reported that their clothes would glow after wearing them to work, and photographers could take pictures of the women in complete darkness, using only their bodies' radioactive emissions. Dr. Harrison Martland, a physician at Newark County, became the first medical professional to make the connection between radium exposure and the workers' illnesses. In 1924, he published groundbreaking research identifying radium as the cause of the mysterious bone disease affecting dial painters. His work earned him the nickname, the father of industrial toxicology, but his findings met fierce resistance from radium companies. The U.S. Radium Corporation launched a campaign to discredit both Dr. Martland and the sick workers. Company officials claimed the women were lying about their symptoms or suffering from other diseases. They suggested the workers had syphilis, which could cause similar bone deterioration, attempting to shame the women into silence. The company even hired their own doctors to examine the workers and provide contradictory diagnoses. If you want to learn more about how corporations have hidden deadly dangers from their workers throughout history, make sure to subscribe, because we expose the darkest chapters of industrial greed and worker exploitation every week. The legal battle that followed would transform American labor law forever. Grace Fryer, one of the most severely affected workers, spent 2 years trying to find a lawyer willing to take on the powerful U.S. Radium Corporation. Most attorneys were either intimidated by the company's resources or believed the case was hopeless. When Fryer finally found legal representation, she was joined by 4 other women: Quinta McDonald, Albina Larice, Edna Hussman, and Catherine Schaub. The press dubbed them the 5 women doomed to die, and their case became a national sensation. Newspapers across the country covered every detail of their suffering, creating public outrage against the radium industry. The women's courage in facing both their illness and a powerful corporation inspired workers everywhere to demand better protection from their employers. The legal proceedings were brutal for the women, who were slowly dying as the case dragged through the courts. Some were too weak to attend hearings and had to be carried into the courtroom on stretchers. Their testimony was heartbreaking as they described watching their bodies deteriorate while their employers denied any responsibility. The radium companies employed every legal tactic to delay and obstruct the proceedings. They challenged the women's credibility, questioned the science linking radium to their illnesses, and argued that any health problems were the workers' own fault for not following safety procedures that had never been explained to them. In 1928, the 5 women finally reached an out-of-court settlement with U.S. Radium. Each received $40,000, equivalent to about $600,000 today, plus medical expenses and an annual pension. While this might seem like a victory, most of the women died within a few years of the settlement, their bodies too damaged by radiation to recover. Catherine Wolfe Donahue's case against the Radium Dial Company proved even more significant legally. Working in Illinois, Donahue faced different laws and a company even more determined to avoid responsibility. Her 1938 lawsuit became the first successful case to establish that employers could be held liable for occupational diseases that developed years after exposure. Donahue's condition was particularly severe. By the time her case went to trial, she weighed only 65 pounds and could barely speak. Her jawbone had been completely destroyed, and she had to be fed through a tube. Despite her condition, she testified with remarkable courage, determined to prevent other workers from suffering as she had. The company's defense strategies revealed the callousness of industrial practices in the early 20th century. They argued that the women had assumed the risk of working with radium, even though the dangers had been deliberately hidden from them. They claimed that any health problems were due to the workers' own negligence or pre-existing conditions. Expert testimony in these cases helped establish the scientific understanding of radiation poisoning. Dr. Martland and other researchers documented how radium accumulated in bones, replacing calcium in the skeletal structure. They explained how the radioactive decay caused continuous internal damage, making recovery impossible once significant exposure had occurred. The radium industry's response to the mounting evidence was to develop new tactics for avoiding responsibility. Some companies moved their operations to different states with more favorable laws. Others simply changed their names and continued operating under new corporate identities. A few attempted to shift blame to the brush manufacturers, claiming that the problem was with the brushes, not the paint. The impact of the Radium Girls cases extended far beyond the courtroom. Their suffering and legal victories helped establish the principle that workers have a right to know about hazards in their workplace. The cases contributed to the development of industrial hygiene as a scientific discipline and influenced the creation of worker compensation laws. The women's courage also inspired the formation of labor unions focused on workplace safety. Their story became a rallying cry for workers demanding protection from industrial hazards and their legal victories provided precedents that would be used in thousands of future cases involving occupational disease. By 1935, the use of radium in consumer products was largely banned, though military applications continued for several more decades. The glowing watch faces that had seemed so magical were replaced with safer alternatives, though it took until the 1960s and 1970s for radium to be completely phased out of most industrial applications. The legacy of the U.S. Radium Corporation serves as a cautionary tale about corporate responsibility. The company's founder, Arthur Roeder, initially denied any knowledge of radium's dangers, but evidence later emerged that company officials had been aware of health risks years before the workers became ill. Ironically, Roeder himself eventually died from radium exposure, having handled the substance extensively in his role as company president. The Orange, New Jersey factory where the tragedy began was eventually demolished, but the contamination remained. The site required extensive environmental cleanup that lasted for decades and cost millions of dollars. Similar contamination was found at other radium facilities across the country, creating ongoing health concerns for surrounding communities. The scientific understanding that emerged from studying the Radium Girls contributed to the development of radiation safety protocols that are still used today. Their suffering helped establish dose limits for radiation exposure and safety procedures for handling radioactive materials. The women unknowingly became subjects in one of the most important studies of radiation's effects on the human body. Modern workplace safety regulations can trace their origins directly to the Radium Girls cases. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, established in 1970, was built on principles first articulated in the legal battles fought by these brave women. Their insistence that workers have a right to safe working conditions became a cornerstone of American labor law. The tragedy also influenced international radiation safety standards. The suffering of the dial painters was studied by scientists worldwide, contributing to global understanding of radiation's biological effects. This knowledge proved crucial during the atomic age, informing safety protocols for nuclear workers and helping prevent similar tragedies. Today, the last known Radium Girl survivor died in 2014, more than 90 years after the first women began painting those glowing watch faces. Their bodies continued to emit measurable radiation until the day they died, carrying the poison that killed them as a permanent reminder of corporate greed and scientific ignorance. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came decades later, when researchers realized that the radium paint wasn't just killing the women who used it. The contamination had spread far beyond those factory walls, and the true extent of the damage was only beginning to be understood.